My name is John Smith. That really is my name, I promise. That isn't one of the skeletons you'll find if you start looking in. There's no other names. I've lived in the 7th District for 24 years. When I was still in high school, I had a rare opportunity to come up and work on a cattle ranch that was just south of the Columbia border, or Canadian border, right by the Columbia River. And it was life-changing. I came up, I drove through Pend Oreille County, the length of it, just because of the route that I chose. And it just, as soon as I hit the region, it just felt like home. Between, just the rural lifestyle, between the way that the people, when I stopped off at that time it was Bob and Cindy's Airport Grocery, right in Ione. I stopped there and nobody knew me and everybody was waving at me. And it was awesome. And so I came and I spent my summer and I worked hard. And I loved the lifestyle so much I never set my clock back. Because I came here from Boise, Idaho, so there was a time change to get here. So I went back, finished high school, and then moved up permanently. And so I had an opportunity to continue working on that ranch, and a few years later I was able to buy a portion of it and start a family. And so we've lived there for years. It's always been my home for about 10 or 15 years of that time period. I was just enjoying being left alone, out doing my thing, working on the land, making something out of nothing. And it thrilled me. But then I had kids. And I took a good look at the faces of my children and I recognized that I wanted a future for them. I wanted them to be able to enjoy the same thing I was doing. And I saw a whole host of challenges that weren't really permitting that. And, truth be told, living in Stevens County, this isn't, especially the northern part, there wasn't an enormous amount of economic opportunity. And I recognized that one of the core elements of any good man or any good woman is being able to provide for themselves. And so I decided to venture into improving my business education, and I came in, if you'll remember, right around the year 2000, the internet was a big deal. And there was this thing called telecommuting. And so it was where an individual could live anywhere in the world and could basically use the internet and telephone to work for other people anywhere in the world. And so I stumbled into an incredible opportunity to work for a Southern California marketing and business development firm and never had to leave home. Well, I did leave home on occasion to go check out a new business or a new project, but 99% of my time was spent right here. And here again, it changed my world. Because I began to rub shoulders with investment bankers and large business owners and small business owners. And I started getting a frontline education. Not an education that was based on academics, but an education where I could actually sit down with these people who did things, people who made things, people who had ideas and saw them come to fruition. And I was able to sit down with them in private conversations and drill them. Just like the grilling that you put Josh through, and you'll probably put me through, I did the same thing with them. And I asked them questions, and I found out what made them tick, and what made them successful, and how their business worked, and what drove them to do what they did. And it was life-changing, and it was almost like being reborn. And so as time progressed, I had the opportunity to move out of working under the cover of the company that I had originally been employed by and went out on my own, started working with other people. And over again, I had clients in other areas and I had offers to move elsewhere and work, but my heart was here. My home was here. This is where I belonged. This is where I felt comfortable. And so I might go away and work on a project for a couple of weeks and then come home, but this was always home. And I was always thinking about the local mom and pop, the retail store on the corner, or the manufacturer. And I was always asking myself, what could what I'm learning elsewhere do for here? How could this experience, how could this energy, how could this knowledge, how could these connections help people here at home? And so over the course of a period of time and opportunity, actually George Staley, former city councilman, former Republican Party chair, he recruited me. He came to me every day for about 6 weeks, and he said, "John, you need to get on the Chamber of Commerce board. Those people need somebody like you. You're young, they're all old. Go get on the Chamber board." And so finally, I listened to George, and I took an opportunity to join, and I got involved, and it was awesome. Because for the first time, for some of the local business owners, I took this customer first policy, where instead of walking into their doors and telling them all the wonderful things that the chamber was going to do and telling them all the different ways that they needed to change their business to be successful, I just sat down with them and I asked them, how's it going? How are we doing? How are we serving you? And what can we do to do that better? Well, it took 45 minutes for me to convince them that I wasn't there for them to write a check. I was genuinely interested in them. And after that 45-minute conversation, where I finally convinced them I was there to hear from them, the next 15 minutes were really productive. But I developed a great relationship with a lot of our local businesses of all size, some of our largest industries, some of our smallest little retail shops, some of people working out of their home-based businesses, some of those things. And still, this was my passion. And I kept working through it, and I've continued to do it. And so in the course of that, somewhere in there, I got a call from a good friend of mine, and he said, so, I've just been recruited to work on Dino Rossi's second run for governor. Would you like to come and help me? And I said, heck yeah. And so I jumped in with both feet, and he and I worked together. We worked really hard, and we got to know Dino a little bit through the campaign trail. We did phone banks, we did all the stuff. And it was a terrific experience. And so when, a couple of years later, when Dino decided to run for Senate, Joel and Shelley, actually, Shelley called me up and said, John, I need a favor. And I said, sure, what is it? What can I do? And she said, well, I've got a special guest coming in from Spokane, and I need you to come and pick them up and bring them up to Colville. Would you mind doing that? And it was Senator Dino Rossi. I got to spend 6 hours to and from Spokane talking about stuff. And at that time, he had not decided to run for Senate yet. It was a brand new, a lot of people were pushing, but he hadn't made the public announcement yet. And so we had some very candid discussions about what was going on. And I told him, if you do this again, I said I was with you before and I'm with you again. And I'll work even harder this time because I figured out all the stuff we did wrong last time. And so we did, worked hard for him. Ended up also working with Kathy McMorris Rogers' campaign that year as well. And we made some significant progress. We increased numbers throughout the 7th District to levels they had never seen before. We set up phone banks. I called people all over the 7th District, including northern Spokane, the northern Spokane County, and even down into areas that weren't in the 7th District, just because they needed bodies and willing hearts, so we did it. We did parades, we did fundraising, we did the whole 9 yards. And after the course of working through those campaigns, there was a vacancy in my precinct. I also worked in our county Republican Party, got to know a lot of our leadership there, and also interacted on the state level and throughout the 7th District. So, I'm basically just catching you up on the details that we already discussed, but this is all a story, because it came to why I decided to put my hat in the ring for this position. And that's because I have a passion for our region. And I've worked with Joel and Shelley and with Bob for long enough to recognize they're good at what they do, not because they're great politicians, but because they love the people of our region. They love our industries. They love our lifestyle. They love our values. And they're effective not because of what they do in Olympia through the 105 or the 60-day session, but what they do at home the rest of the time. The way that I got to know Joel and Shelley and Bob wasn't by going over and visiting them in Olympia. It's because they were at the meetings I was at. When we were talking about wolves, when we were talking about wilderness, when we were talking about all of our local issues, they were there. And so I know what they have to do in order to be effective, and most of that happens here. And so I've grown to trust and respect them. I count Senator Morton as one of my personal heroes, and a few days ago, he gave me one of the most distinct honors in my life, and that's that I could stop calling him my hero and I could start calling him my friend. And for me, that was huge. And so, when I heard Joel and Shelley talk about working as a team and moving things forward, my business experience has taught me that in order to make progress, in order to succeed, in order to move issues forward, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just have to know and have the wisdom to recognize the smart people and to listen to them. You have to be able to bring people together and develop teams of people who know more about the issues that are important than you do. And you have to have the humility to listen to their solutions, to listen to their advice, and to follow it. And so I'm not coming here and I'm not sitting here because I believe that I'm the greatest politician that ever was. And I'm not coming here because I think I'm going to go to Olympia and radically change it and usher in the new era of peace and prosperity for our region. The reason I'm sitting here is because I believe that the 7th District deserves someone who knows it intimately, who's lived it, who loves it, and is willing to fight for it. And I have done that, and I will continue to do that if you choose to give me the opportunity to go to Olympia. But I won't just do it from Olympia. I'll do it from here. I'll do it from Omak, and I'll do it from Spokane, and I'll do it from Newport, or even Medellin Falls if we need to, and from Republic, or even Curlew. If you want to have me in Curlew, we'll be there.
Even Curlew.
All right. Thanks, John.
So the point is that I love this region, and I fought for it, and I will continue to fight for it, whether or not you give me this opportunity. But I would ask that if you do give me this opportunity, that you also, I've heard a lot of people make campaign promises. I'll do this if you elect me, and I'll do that if you elect me. Well, from when I've talked with each one of you, I've flipped it around, and I've asked you for a campaign promise. And that is that if you appoint me, I need you. I need your input. I need you to introduce me to the people who have challenges that need help. I need you to show me where the key areas are in your regions, in your counties, where I can be of the most benefit. Because we all have a limited amount of time, and I want to make the best use of the time that I have to make the maximum benefit for you at home. Now, whether that's doing something in Olympia, or whether that's picking up a phone or being in a meeting at home, I'm willing to do either, because I recognize that's really what it takes to do this job. So thank you.
And questions for Mr. Smith? Who would like to begin?
Al Frank's got that.
Okay. He just wasn't waving it around wild enough for me to see it. Mr. French, or Commissioner French.
Thank you. Thank you, John. So I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Josh, in that, only twist it around a little bit. Since, according to Josh's numbers, 40% of the redistricted 7 is in Spokane County, and you are very well based in the northern part. What are the things that you're going to do to reach out to the constituents that are living in the urban areas of Spokane County?
So that is a great question. And actually, through my business development work last summer, I spent several days a week working with clients in Spokane. So I already do know many of the issues there. I already do know many of the concerns, especially that business owners have in Spokane. In addition to that, through my work with the Colville Chamber, I've also been actively engaged in the 395 expansion for several years. And I also recognize its importance not just to Spokane, but to the rest of the region. The way that I understand it is we participated in a study for the Colville Chamber not too long ago, where we discovered that over half of our retail spending took place outside of Stevens County, and the majority of that was in Spokane County. So what that really means is there is an intimate connection between Spokane, even the urban area, and the northern counties. Because if there was hundreds of millions from Stevens alone, when we combine that with Barry and Ponderay and even some from Okanagan, that makes the northern part of the 7th District the largest trading partner, or one of the largest trading partners that Spokane has. And so when we really talk about this, I'm looking to serve the entire district, not just one particular area. And while I understand and know rural issues, I grew up in suburbia. I grew up in Boise, Idaho, which is very similar to the northern part of Spokane that I would represent in this office. So I understand the importance of roads. I understand the importance of schools and education and those core values. I thought Josh did a tremendous job of talking about those basic core business issues that are important in those more urban areas. And so I'm familiar with those. I've worked with them, and I already have a pre-established network in Spokane of people that, where I need to, can help me grow in that. So, great, thanks.
Commissioner Milkey.
Thank you. I'll also ask the same questions, at least one of them. The 2 questions. The first one is can you give us a little bit more information with regard to your involvement in the Colville Farmers Market and how that's structured and how that works? And then the second question is the same one that I asked Josh, and that is, in this Senate appointment, you'll be going into a caucus of 23 members. The only way it gets to a majority of 25 is because 2 Democrats have found common ground with the other 23 Republicans. And so my question is obviously those two Democrats have to go home to their district and show that they accomplished more by being part of a coalition than they did previously as part of the Democrat caucus. So I'm trying to figure out how you look at your role in keeping that coalition together as opposed to where ideology might cause a split with those two Democrats. So those are my two questions.
Okay, so I'll deal with the farmer's market first, and then we'll come to the coalition after that. So on our small farm, we own a very small farm, so we have very limited acreage. And so early on, I was intrigued by the idea of different articles that I had read about people on small acreage actually making a living wage. And a lot of them revolved around farmers markets. And so we kind of looked through the area, and for a couple of years, my wife and I were just customers. We went and shopped, and we were kind of doing market research to see what they were doing and how it was working locally, and if it could work for us. And so I believe it was in '99, we actually took our first leap, and we became vendors. And we became some of the most consistent vendors at a particular farmers market that we visited. And after a course of several years, we were invited to be a part of the leadership there. And then ultimately, I believe it was 2003 is what sticks in my mind. The president of the organization at that time came to me and said, "John, I've got some personal issues. I'm gonna have to step away. If you want the farmers market, take it over, run it, do whatever. If you don't, I'm gonna shut it down." And so that year, that this was in March, and that particular year, my whole summer's income was anticipating that there was going to be a farmer's market. And so it was kind of a significant blow, and I knew a lot of the other families that depended on it, and so I said, yeah, we'll do it. But what I didn't recognize is kind of the personal challenges that would rise. For one thing, there was an immediate need for some capital infusion, and I didn't have a lot of capital, and so I ended up taking some of my own personal seed money in order to invest in that and to make it possible and make it viable. So after several years, my own personal financial status got better and better, and I still had my commitment to the farmers market, but I actually hired one of my employees to come and do a lot of the regular management, and in the course of that, she found some irregularities from some of the filings that had taken place before I took over that really concerned her, and so we went and talked with a local lawyer about it, and his advice was that we transition the market out of its nonprofit status and into just a purely for-profit status. And at that time, one of the challenges we had is there was no one that was willing to serve on the board. There was no one willing to participate, carry the weight, carry the burden. And at that point, personally, I had invested an enormous amount of personal money into the business, or into the market. It wasn't a business at that time, and it wasn't supporting itself. And so the lawyer recommended we liquidate the assets, take care of whatever outstanding debts we had, and transition into a profit status, which we've operated the market in that capacity for, I'm gonna say, probably since 2005, although without actually looking at the paperwork, don't hold me to that. It would have been 2005, 2006 when we made that transition. And so now, regarding the coalition, I think we have a tremendous opportunity here. You know, we now have, since 2002 was the last time that we had a Republican sitting on the Ways and Means Committee, in charge, chairing the Ways and Means Committee. That's huge. We have the opportunity right now to have a significant impact. You know, we've talked about budget problems and we've talked about budget priorities. Well, Republicans have the opportunity now to set the stage. We have the opportunity to frame the argument. And we need to do everything that we can to move our region, to move our state forward. And I believe in the philosophy of George Washington when it comes to standing on principle. When George Washington was commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, the way of fighting in those days was for generals to advance their own personal career by taking almost cataclysmic stands where they lost enormous amounts of men and they made very little gain, but it was viewed as a very valorous stand. And as a consequence, their losses were just catastrophic. And they really made little progress. Well, Washington's philosophy was, instead of making those kind of stands, which he viewed as being stands on pride, he recognized that when he went home, he was going to have to go home and he was going to have to explain to the wives and the children of the falling officers why their sacrifice meant something. And he couldn't sit with the idea that it was just to advance his own personal career. And so Washington recognized that there's a difference between standing for principle and standing for pride. And so when Washington took a stand and when Washington fought, he fought in a way so that even if he lost, he moved the cause of the Continental Army forward. And as a result, most of the British generals in the day called him a coward, called him a fool, and said that he had no honor. But as far as I'm concerned, General Washington set the standard for what leadership could and should be. And so I would follow his example, and I would ask myself, if I'm going to make a stand, if I'm going to cost either political capital, financial capital, or relationship capital, I've got to ask, I'm willing to make a stand, but I need to know that even if I lose that stand, that I'm going to move the cause and the values and the issues that are important to the 7th District further down the road.
Commissioner Dansel from Perry County.
That's very nice, Donna, very nice. John, spoke with you quite a bit throughout this process. I know that, and the same thing could be said of Josh too, both conservative, hope for limited government, less taxes, less permitting, less regulation. What specifically though, in the budget and with permitting and regulation and so on and so forth, specific ideas you have at accomplishing those goals?
Well, from what I've seen, as far as committee assignments and as far as the way that the actual work of the Senate will be done, is I'm not slated to be a part of the Ways and Means Committee, which would actually be preparing the budget. But I do know the chair and the, I think it's chair and co-chair or chair and vice chair of the Ways and Means Committee, have met them both, and I would be more than happy to provide them with my personal input on what should be changed. And so what I view is if we go back and we look at basic principles, our founding fathers told us that there were 3 basic elements, 3 basic reasons for government to function, and that was to protect life, our essential God-given liberties, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the founders recognized that pursuit of happiness wasn't just about doing whatever makes you feel good about yourself. They recognized that it was a productive lifestyle. It was someone who took raw materials, who took property and used it in such a way as to make more abundance than there was when they began. Essentially, it was about entrepreneurialism. And so the purpose and the role of government is to protect those 3 basic elements. And property rights are, of course, a part of that 3rd one. And so what I view is the main reason why our state and our nation has gotten into the budgetary challenges that we're in is because instead of focusing on those essential core responsibilities of government, we have now used government as a blunt hammer to try to fix everything. And I think some of that comes back to this very political process. Because even as Republicans, when we're on the campaign speech, the first half of the speech will be, government's bad, we need to reduce regulation, government's the problem, we need to get it out of the way. And then the next part of the speech is, and if you elect me and make me a part of government, then I will make, it'll be like playing country music backwards. Your dog will come back, your wife will come back, everything will be better. And that's the problem. The real solutions aren't going to come by you electing me. They're not going to come from what I do in Olympia and what legislation I pass. The real solutions are going to come from your constituents, and if I get this position, my constituents, who know how to create jobs. That's not government's role. Government's role is to create an environment where private individuals, private property owners can take their resources and make not only a living for themselves, but abundance and productivity for everyone around them. And so when it comes to the budgetary concerns, I believe here in the state we have the priority of education that would be added into the 3 other core principles that our founders believed in. And so I believe that the way to deal with the budget is to recognize that our state should be focused on those 4 issues and the preservation of those inherent basic rights, and the things that don't fall within those 4 categories, well, maybe we should be looking at cuts there, and maybe we should be looking at trimming those programs back.
Any more questions? Any hands I'm not seeing here?
I'll ask the same question I asked Josh.
Okay.
What, considering that the north-south corridor is one of 3 major projects that is the last to be completed, And there are other projects such as the Columbia River crossing that our former governor put ahead of that. If we want to see the north-south corridor completed, it needs to be something that's a priority for all of our Eastern Washington legislators. So would you advocate on behalf of the north-south corridor, specifically with regards to making sure it would be in any transportation package that went forward?
Well, as I said earlier, I've already worked on the 395 project. And I also have worked with Canadian officials north of the border who are really eager to see some progress here. And I recognize that in order to make that 395 expansion fully what it could and should be, we're gonna have to build a coalition, we're gonna have to develop and cultivate partnerships. And I feel like being a senator from the 7th district, not only will I be in a position to advance that through legislation, but I also feel that I'll be able to facilitate that relationship both with Spokane County officials, with the Department of Transportation, and also with our neighbors to the north. Because ultimately, that project won't be completed unless we do it together and unless we coordinate our efforts. And so the one other minor advantage that I have is I've already worked with people that have a full plan for funding the project, who already know how to get it built. And all I need to do is tap into their resources. Now, don't quiz me on the precise details there, because I don't have those precise details at my hand. But like I said, the key to strong leadership isn't necessarily having all the answers, but knowing who does and being willing to work with them to get it done. I've already done that, and I would continue to.
Commissioner Detro.
Thank you. This is basically not a question, but a comment to bring the audience that's here today up to speed. I compliment you for seeking me out individually and giving me all the time that was necessary to quiz and question and seek philosophy. So that's the reason that I'm not asking the question. I've had personal one-on-one time with John, and he took that upon himself to seek me out on an individual basis. So.
Same here.
Ditto.
Yeah, ditto.
Ditto here too.
Commissioner Miller from Ferry County.
All right, thanks, Don. Thank you, John. You know, I heard, and I agree with what you said about your analysis with life, liberty, and happiness, and those three things in the Constitution, and also that schools are a priority for the state. So could you give us kind of a brief overview of how you would translate that to, you know, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness? How would you use that to pick which areas of the state government would be a priority?
Sure. So the way that I perceive it from the state's perspective, the preservation of life, and that there are some important ramifications there that our state seems to have taken some positions contrary to that. However, I do believe, generally speaking, the position of life also pertains to public safety. And specifically, in our case, you know, when you live in a rural area, there are 52 deaths per year on 395. On the 395 corridor between Spokane and Colville, 52 deaths. That's one person a week. That's a public safety issue. That isn't just a transportation, it's not just an economic issue, although there are economic elements to it. We're talking public safety here. That's one of the core responsibilities of government, is to address those issues and to not to keep you from making choices, but rather to create an environment where you are free to make choices. And so when it comes to our essential liberties, our state constitution, I think, to a certain degree, does a better job of identifying and illuminating those core essential God-given liberties than maybe even the federal constitution does. It goes into a lot more detail about, you know, those essential rights to speech and to the press and public speaking and religion and et cetera. And so, you know, those by far, when it comes to, it seems that to a certain degree in our state, rather than defending those liberties, it almost seems like there are people that have the perspective that we need to be protected from those liberties. And I think that both our nation and our personal lives function better when we are free to pursue those liberties, not restricted from them. And then finally, when it comes to the pursuit of happiness, when it comes to the state budget, that comes back to just creating an environment that is favorable, that is hospitable for entrepreneurs to take risks, maybe even to fail sometimes, but to take risks, be willing to gamble, be willing not just to gamble, not just to pitch the dice, but to take their hard-earned savings, their dreams, and to make them real. And we need to have a state that rewards that. And, you know, it seems like all too many of the agencies right now, instead of rewarding it or respecting it, they view business owners as the enemy, and they treat us that way. And I think one area where we could definitely improve the pursuit of happiness is when it comes to the appointment of the different heads, which potentially the Senate may actually have some say in who gets to head up some of these departments this year. So that could be one area where I could have some direct impact.
Thank you, John.
Well, and then there's also property rights as well. I should probably mention that because as I mentioned in Okanagan County, it seems like we have property privileges, not property rights. And, the founders recognized that our ability to be productive, our ability to have an economy is directly tied into our ability to own and utilize our private property. And so I believe there's a character within our nation, generally, but also within our state, that views it more as, this is something that we can do, but really, there's almost a perspective of viewing private property as everybody's property, and everybody having a right to tell the individual what they could and should do. And I believe that character could and should be changed, and as both Joel and Shelley mentioned, there are some prime opportunities to take part in that this year, and I'd love to.
Commissioner McCart from the great county of Stevens.
John, one of the issues that you're probably well aware of in our county is I'm going to say the lack of economic development, and especially in District 1. I have a very hard time bringing business in there. We lack infrastructure. And part of that infrastructure goes back to water. You don't have water, you don't have a business, you don't have a home. We've had a lot of conversations with Senator Morton over the years related to water moving south. I know Spokane County is doing some water value studies right now. We've got closed basins all over our county. Can you tell me how you're going to deal, probably not being on a committee that deals with water directly, how are you going to deal with those issues being a single person rather than a team in the House where they've got two in separate committees? How are you going to deal with those issues that are vitally important both to our economics and just our ability to live here?
That's a great question, because you're right, when it comes to economic development, not just in the northern counties, but also in Spokane, it's intimately tied to water. And the prime regulatory agency right now that is pinching our ability to develop and utilize our water resources is the Department of Ecology. And having worked a fair amount with Shelley, I recognize that she most definitely is the most experienced with addressing and dealing with them, and I would be very interested in continuing to work with her. But specifically, when it comes to the water usage within our county, this isn't purely a Stevens County issue. And I know, and I already have a working relationship with, as an example, Representative Manweller from the Ellensburg area. Kittitas County, when it comes to water, is in even worse condition than we are. And we have problems, and we may be heading there, but right now they're experiencing some real huge challenges. And so I know that I don't just have to work on my own, I know that there are others. And then also Senator Schessler in the Senate. This is a big issue for all of the ag community. And I know that when it comes to building and developing those coalitions, that's why this coalition government is so critically important, is because this year we have an opportunity to actually get bills to the floor. We actually have the opportunity to propose things in the Senate, propose solutions, look at regulations, and make changes that we haven't had for several years. And so when it comes to those specific issues, I will absolutely take the advice and work with the team that I'm going to be a part of. But more than that, I also know the people right here in our own community, in our own region, that have made some pretty huge strides. People who already know the details, who already know the cast of characters, And like I said, they're the smartest people in the room, and I will tap into them, and I will utilize their experience, their resources, and their connections to move whatever issue specifically is facing our community, and to a broader extent, the regulatory issues that affect the entire state. Because, the one thing that I will say on the water issue is when it comes to the way that the Department of Ecology treats the state as a whole, we are regulated as if the entire state was a part of the Puget Sound watershed, and we're not. And policies that might make sense for mussel beds when it comes to something that directly dumps into the Puget Sound don't make sense on this side of the state, because they don't have those issues where our water goes, which is more south to Vancouver. So when it comes to those core issues, I believe that we need, as Shelley mentioned earlier, we need better science when it comes to dealing with regulation, and we need to hold the agencies accountable that are using it to have regionally relevant peer-reviewed science, not just best available, which could be from wherever they choose to cherry pick it. So those would be my specific responses to water.
Commissioner French from Spokane County.
One of the challenges that counties and small cities deal with is unfunded mandates, and we've already talked a little bit about that in our conversation with Josh, and I know based upon my conversations with you where you stand on that. But the other thing that the state seems to be more and more comfortable with is the idea of sweeping revenue away from counties and cities, particularly small cities. And what I'm talking about specifically is when they came in and swept the revenue out of the Public Works Trust Fund to help balance the budget. And that trust fund was set up so that small communities could use those funds to build out their water systems, improve their street systems, everything like that. And I just think it's unconscionable that the state would rob revenue from small cities to balance their budget and leave small cities standing alone. So what can you do, or what would your position be relative to, reinstating the revenue that was guaranteed through the public works trust funds, and making sure that those revenues weren't robbed from small cities in the future?
Honestly, I really think that what we need to look at is it wasn't just purely the legislature that robbed those funds. What it really was is a philosophy. And that is a different set of priorities than the ones that we hold here on this side of the state. And so what I see as an advantage is now with this coalition government in the Senate, we have the opportunity here where the values that are going to be represented in the Senate don't particularly lean in that direction anymore. And as a matter of fact, I think they would be opposed to that sort of action moving forward in the future. Because, just breaking it down again back into principle, it really is the city and the county governments that are closest to the people. And when it comes to who knows best for the people, it is the city and the county governments, not the state government. The farther removed we get from the people, the less they are truly represented and the less their interests are truly guarded. And so from a philosophical, from a principle standpoint, my intention at looking at any legislation would be to recognize that you as county commissioners, all of you as county commissioners, you know your counties better. And the idea that I would raid your funds that are supposed to be dedicated to local projects to justify things that your constituency really derives little or no benefit from, that's completely against my whole worldview and my core philosophy of how representative government should work.
Yes, Commissioner Spook.
I think we all know, I'm going to ask you a similar question as what I asked Josh. I think we all know that there's certain bills that are like spitting in the wind, but they send a message. So my question is along those lines. Are you willing to balance political capital versus principle, as in that General Washington viewpoint? And I'll give you an example. Nullification. I want to know first if you're familiar with it and if you would be willing to use it. Or would you take that General Washington stance and decide that it wouldn't be that?
Well, for one thing, when it comes to asking kind of what ifs about specific pieces of legislation, is there are things that are good in principle but aren't good in practice. And so when it comes to a specific bill, I'd have to look at that bill on an individual basis to determine, is this worth the effort? Will this move our cause forward? Or will this just stick our thumb in somebody's eye and make them mad and make it harder to make progress later? But you are very right. There are circumstances where it is, and I think one great example of principle is, the whole story of how the Star Spangled Banner was written. The War of 1812, the government had disbanded our military. We didn't have much to protect ourselves. The militia had run into Fort McHenry, and bombs bursting in air all night long. The British pulled back to where they could bombard the fort, and the fort couldn't fire back, and they just beat it to pieces. And the whole "Oh say can you see," those whole lines were written because out on the ships, Francis Scott Key, who was a prisoner, was afraid that perhaps the city had fallen. And he knew that if at dawn's early light, if they saw that flag flying, they knew that the Republic was still alive. And so rather than just flying the battered, war-torn flag that they had flown all night, they raised one of the biggest flags that has ever been flown over any nation, called the Defiance flag. And they said, we're still here, we're still fighting, and bring some more. And so to directly answer your question, there are occasions when the best choice is just to stand and look them in the eye and say, thus far and no further.
So you're familiar with nullification?
Yes, and I am familiar with nullification as well.
Commissioner Parker.
Thank you, I finally got an introduction. We're just working out our working relationship, our first day together, it's been good. Same question, John, because the nature of the position and the nature of the future of that position requiring 2 more campaigns after the selection process, can you guarantee to this Board of Commissioners that there's not something that would have a direct impact on electability?
So like I mentioned before in my introduction, I have had the opportunity to work on a number of district-wide campaigns. And I've worked with some truly incredible people, honestly people that I don't feel like I could fill their shoes. And somehow opposition found things to criticize them over. So I'm 39 years old, and if in 39 years I haven't done something that would upset somebody, or if I haven't done something that somebody else would find fault with, I haven't really been doing anything of value. And so truth be told, through the course of the next 2 campaigns, I can imagine that people are going to try to dig and find all kinds of reasons not to like me. But truth be told, I got in this fight because I believe in my community, I believe in my region, and I'm willing to fight for the principles and values that we hold dear.
Any more questions? Yes, sir.
John and I agree. We spent quite a bit of time together over in Monterey County. But I'm going to ask the same question, and we talked about it a little bit when we were together on the unemployment issue, which plagues all of us in this room. And that is, what can you do specifically if you're selected to help us with the unemployment issue?
So specifically in our conversation, one of the prime concerns that you expressed was the amount of fraud and the amount of abuse that's in some of the unemployment system. And you're very right. And as a business owner, I've experienced some of that myself. And some of the frustration where as a business owner, I'm treated like a criminal, even though some of the people on those roles are really acting like criminals. And so for one thing, when it comes to that regulation, I believe that as an advocate, I've watched Senator Morton, I've watched Representative Short and Kretz go to bat in specific issues and address some of those waste, fraud, and abuse things locally. But then when it comes to just the general idea of economic development and the actual status of our economy and what's happening here, this is something that I get really passionate about. Because I believe, when I was a little boy, my great-grandfather took me for a walk. And he pointed out this great big cottonwood tree. And he said, "Do you see that tree?" And I said, "Yep." And he said, "No, you don't. You only see half of it." And I said, what do you mean? And he said, most of that tree is under the ground and you can't even see it. And so the moral of his story is that there are dirty elements, there are things that plunge into the earth and bring forth value, that produce beauty, that often we don't like to look at. And when it comes to our region and when it comes to our economy, whether it's Spokane County or whether it's any of the 4 northern counties, we have a natural resource-based economy. And so if we're going to talk about any level of job production, if we're going to talk about the economic future of our region, most economic forecasters say there are very few areas that are truly promising for the next decade. And those areas are things that we're strong in. So my proposal would be an all-of-the-above strategy when it comes for economic development. But specifically, we have got to untie the roots. What we've experienced with our state government and with the federal government is they've taken our economy out of the ground and they put it in a nice pot, and they're giving us this philosophy of exchanging good, productive industry jobs for service-based jobs. And they're painting this idea that we can do away with the roots of the tree, and that we can hang fruit on it, and that we can spray it with artificial stimulus financing, and somehow we can make that tree healthy. The truth is, if we want our economy to be healthy, if we want to produce jobs, if we want to address the unemployment issues within our region, we've got to go back to those core industries, which are agriculture, mining, energy, timber and forestry, and we've got to recognize that the way that those service jobs are created, the way that we have the ability to provide the essential county services that we all need, is by unleashing the potential of those resource-based industries, because as they work, they will generate capital that will flow through every other element of the economy, whether it's service, whether it's retail, or even government. So if we're going to talk about unemployment, the real core issue goes back to most people in Olympia don't see the whole tree. And one thing that I believe I can do, that I've already done, is I can take people who are accustomed to only looking at half of the tree and help them recognize the value and the benefit of the rest of it. And as a result, I believe that if we can work through those issues, which we already have to some degree, I believe that's how we're going to address the unemployment issue in the entire 7th District.
Anyone else? Any more? Okay, I think at this, oh, I do have one more. I was ignoring you.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I'm going to go back to one of my the economic problems in Okanagan County and downriver actually from the Okanagan to the head of the Okanagan River to the Columbia, or the mouth of Columbia, is the salmon recovery efforts that are going on. And the money that's being spent up and down the rivers to the governor's salmon recovery efforts and the upper Columbia salmon recovery efforts on a federal level there. And there's a lot of money being spent in this state there, delegated from our coffers there to projects to help the recovery of the salmon. This came about there, of course, in the late 90s when we were attacked by the National Marine Fisheries Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. The environmental communities, when they listed these as endangered there. And the threats that we have to do something or the federal government's going to come in and shut us down. So these efforts were, and in my opinion, they were kind of, they were a result of that, but I think that was an excuse to go forward with this. But in the salmon recovery efforts there's millions of dollars being spent up and down the river, and especially in Okanagan County, but not only salmon projects there, but also purchasing land. And we are losing our land in Okanagan County on a darn near monthly basis there, from the salmon recovery and the wolf habitat. We just lost another piece of land to the federal, to the state fish and wildlife. Bought it there over in the Mid-Howe Valley there. They call it shrub steppe habitat or whatever. Is actually 90% of it was farmland there, and those are they're gone forever. along with a lot of these water rights that went with this land, are turned into in-stream flow, and those are gone forever there. What can you do to help us fight it?
Well, this comes back to principle again. This is an example of where the state government has absolutely decimated the Okanagan economy due to overregulation of its core industries. And so as a token gesture, they provide this replacement theology when it comes to economic development. And so they propose that, okay, yeah, maybe we've destroyed 50,000 head of cattle in your operations, but we're gonna go ahead and replace that with tourism jobs. Well, I've seen the stats. You know, those cattle ranchers, those backwoods guys out there who are walking around following their cows, for Stevens County, that's a $45 million industry. There are hundreds of people throughout our economy that are employed by that industry. It's not just the people chasing cows, because when we look at the way that economics work, that money repeats itself over and over, because those farmers and ranchers, they buy things from our local feed stores, they pay taxes, they buy gas, they buy all of the necessary ingredients to make their particular operation work. And so as a result, the multiplier used for that ag-based, productive-based industry, that actually creates more economic development within the community than tourism jobs. Because the average ag income is, depending on the county, for all, you know, for district-wide, depending on the county, the average ag income is anywhere from the very high 20,000s a year, so like $29,000, $28,000 a year, all the way up into the 40s, $40,000 a year. That's a decent living wage. That's approaching the average income in the state. When we look at tourism jobs, which salmon recovery would largely feed into those tourism jobs, we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $15,000 a year, and they're only part-time. These aren't the kind of jobs that we can have mothers and fathers support a family from. These are the kind of jobs that we can have temporary, where we have transient people coming into our communities for a few months and then leaving and taking their money elsewhere to spend it. So when it comes to salmon recovery, you know, I get the idea that we have some challenges when it comes to complying with federal regulations. And when it comes to those specific areas where we're applying that plan, I need input from the three of you to know where and how we can apply the appropriate pressure to steer away from specific projects. But when it comes to funding, you know, I like Josh's statement. I mean, let's face it, our state is running short on money. And I get the way that the budget works, and I get that their capital money is different from their operating money. But I've worked in business enough to know that if you can't meet your operating budget, it's time to liquidate some assets. And what I would like to see is, I would like to see some ideas, I would like to see some proposals, I would like to see some scenarios where if the state or federal government is going to take money out of the tax base, that we need to see something where they need to put an equivalent amount of land back into the tax base, where it can be utilized and used for some type of productive industry. And just to show you my passion for that and where my resources go, on the state Republican platform, when it comes to natural resources and also the agriculture, I helped draft a plank that talked about the importance of private land ownership and reducing the amount of federal and state ownership of land and getting it back into the hands of private citizens. And I've worked with some really incredible people with some great ideas as to how to do that. And if you choose to give me this appointment, I'd really like to pursue that further and see what we can bring together. Because it's not going to come out of my head. I believe it's going to come out of yours and out of the people in your community that are directly impacted.
Thank you. I'll give another chance. Anyone that come up with a nice profound question for John that he can't answer? So at this point in the procedure, I'll give you that other 15-minute break, and the commissioners will retire to the conference room there for a short executive session where we will not make any decisions. We'll have a few discussions and probably come back out and finish this process.